Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MSCA Choose Europe for Science Latvian National Information Day. I'm very pleased to see you all here, and I hope that this event will give you useful insights about this new call, as it is the very first of its kind, and I know that there may still be some unclarities about it, so please don't hesitate to ask any questions if you have them. So, doesn't go. About today's agenda, as I mentioned, I'm very happy to see you and welcome here. And yes, and that's why we are joined today by a wonderful policy officer from European Commission, who will give a presentation about the program. And afterwards, we will have also a Q&A session, followed by some closing remarks from me. Yes. And some information before we start. I kindly ask you to switch off your microphone and camera. And as mentioned, we will also have this Q&A session afterwards, and you can submit your questions via the Slido platform. I will shortly share it in the chat. Sorry, I will admit participant. Yes, I will shortly share the code also in the chat. For specific individual questions, don't hesitate to write to me in my email. And the webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be also shared with you in a few days' time, together with a short feedback form, so you can let me know what could be improved for the future events. Yes, and presentation will be given by Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture of the European Commission, Annelies van de Ven. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you. I'm giving the floor to Annelies.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and for anticipating my needs today. Everyone might not know, I just got back from vacation and my computer still seems to be slightly on vacation. So, but luckily this everything was solved with an email, so I didn't even have to go into panic mode. So thanks again for this. And now we hope that was the end of the technical difficulties, and I'll give you all a bit of insight into the call that is currently open and is open until the 3rd of December. Let me see if I can share my slides. Just a quick confirmation that you're seeing my slides, perhaps.
Yes, everything's good.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, so if any of you were at the info session on the 9th of October, some of this will be the call hasn't changed since then, so this will be familiar to you. But of course, during the Q&A, I can go into more depth on any specific questions that you may have. So the MSCA Choose Europe for Science call, it's a call, as you all know, at institutional level. So it's a single beneficiary that applies, and that beneficiary is an organization that is aiming to recruit and train researchers at postdoctoral level. And the idea is to address the precarity in research careers. That's kind of the overarching aim that we had in mind with launching this pilot call. It's very new. We're very much testing what is possible. So the idea is to tackle precarity by having a longer project period, and then also within the proposal requesting that institutions also think about and describe possible employment opportunities that they would be offering, so concrete career prospects beyond the project period. But it is still, an MSCA action, so we do still adhere to this aim to have research training, but also excellent research, to really promote excellent research throughout Europe, and to spread best practices as well through our actions. MSCA Choose Europe for Science, any of you who are a bit familiar with the MSCA co-fund action We'll see some similarities throughout my presentation, but it is really good to still, pay attention because there are several key differences that are important to note. So the first big difference is that, as I said, MSCA Choose Europe for Science is a mono-beneficiary action. So one institution will be applying, that's the institution that will be claiming costs, also that will be paying the researchers' salaries. There are no implementing partners in MSCA Choose Europe for Science. So there's the beneficiary is really the one that's expected to be doing the primary recruitment. But there can be associated partners. So these can contribute to training, to secondments, they can provide resources, but they can't claim costs or recruit researchers. So it's really on one institution to do that. And we have a specific cap on the amount of funding that we provide as part of the Choose Europe for Science contribution from the EU. It's a co-funded program, and that's 3.5 million per beneficiary. And we've gotten several questions about why this is so low, because, for example, in a co-fund, you can get up to 10 million. And the reason is because our budget for this Choose Europe for Science call is much smaller. And we're also expecting, because there's this longer term recruitment, there's quite a high, as you'll see later, co-funding requirement. So institutions have a heavy load that they would pay themselves. So we also expect projects to be quite a bit smaller. And because we only have 22.5 million euros for this pilot call, we also want to make sure that we can fund several projects. So it wouldn't make sense to have a cap at, for example, 10 million, because then we could only really finance 2 projects. Whereas if we want the pilot to be successful and we really want to see what the variety is that different institutions can provide and what their needs are, then it's really important that we get a bit of a diverse group. Or at least, maybe not diverse, but at least multiple projects that we're funding. So the duration is very specific. And again, I'll go into more detail on this later. But like I said, one of the aims is precarity, addressing precarity, reducing precarity in research careers in order to make research careers attractive. And that's both to attract talent, but also to retain talent in Europe. So we have amazing, talented researchers already inside Europe. And we want to make sure that they see Europe as a place where they can build their careers and they can have sustainable careers. So the project duration is quite a bit longer than your average postdoctoral project, because it's either 4 or 5 years, and that's divided, as I'll explain later, into 2 different phases in terms of how the funding works. And then the overall program is a maximum of 72 months, which means it's, the 5-year project is, it's either 4 or 5 years, but then we wanted to add 12 months because we know that you need time to hire the researchers, and this can actually take quite a long time. And then the recruitment is the minimum of 3 fellows recruited per call. So it's not it's not a PF, it's not a postdoctoral fellowship. It's meant to be it can be a very small cohort, but it's meant to be a cohort that's being recruited. So in that way, similar to MSCA co-fund. There's a specific type of researcher that is eligible. So when you're dimensioning a Choose Europe for Science program, a proposal, the researchers that you will recruit have to adhere to these requirements. They have to be PhD holders. So we say postdoctoral. We don't have a scientific age limit in any way. They just have to be holding, they have to have their PhD by the vacancy call deadline. That's your vacancy call. So it has nothing to do with our call deadline, but it's really the deadline that is set by the program for the recruitment. They can't already be permanently employed by the beneficiary. Temporary employment is fine, but it's not meant to be for people who already have open-ended permanent contracts at your institution. They have to adhere to the mobility rule. So this is the standard MSCA mobility rule, which says that, you can't have spent more than 12 months in the last 36 months within, the hosting country. Or the researcher can't have spent that amount of time within the hosting country. And again, the deadline is the vacancy call deadline. So that's set by the institution that is recruiting. And then also, because we got some questions about this because of the promotion made around Choose Europe with regards to the situation in the US for researchers. But we want to make it very clear that this is not just for recruiting US researchers. Like with any MSCA call, our calls are completely nationality agnostic. So it's meant to be researchers from any nationality. Yes, I think that's it for eligible researchers. It's the same kind of 3 categories of award criteria that you'll all probably be very used to by now with MSCA and Horizon Europe more generally. So we have excellence, impact, and implementation. They are weighted, so excellence is weighted the most highly. And one of the new things is that we have included this threshold of 3 in excellence. And this is really because we're trying to reinforce the research excellence being really central in MSCA. We got questions about Choose Europe being more of a capacity building program, and we want to emphasize that, yes, this is a program that's meant to spread good practice. It's a program that's meant to elevate the competitiveness and the attractiveness of institutions, but it still is also a research excellence program. So, and this is also somewhere where you'll see anyone who's familiar with the other calls, that there's a bit of a mix of different elements from standard MSCA calls within the evaluation criteria. All of this is also explained in a little bit more depth with different sub-criteria in the template part B, which you can get on the Funding and Tenders portal. So I also do recommend kind of having a read through that before you start writing, because it gives more details. And the selection criteria for excellence are quality of the selection and recruitment process for the researchers. So this is where you would describe how you're selecting, how you're recruiting the researchers. There are certain requirements that are built in there, which again are described in the template, also in the guide for applicants. Things like there's not allowed to be any pre-selection. Things like the fact that there has to be, an international component, because this is a postdoctoral call to the selection procedure, the selection panels. So there's certain kind of red lines is what we call them, but certain things that are in alignment also with the European Charter for Researchers, with what they consider best practice in terms of selection and recruitment processes. But on the other hand, there's actually also a lot of freedom because we know that there's institutions that work with narrative CVs, different types of CVs, different types of criteria that they put centrally in their recruitment. So there, it's a matter of explaining in the proposal what the criteria that you will set, how you will recruit, how you will make the selection of the researchers, and then again making sure that those key elements, like what I said about no pre-selection, that there's a very diverse selection panel, that you also explain those sufficiently. Then the second excellence criterion is on the quality and the attractiveness of the appointment conditions. So this is things like the salaries, the benefits, the contract type, but there's also an element in there of training, of supervision, the research environment, maybe any infrastructures that you have. So really, So really, what are the appointment conditions that you are offering to these researchers, and explaining how they're attractive. I mentioned in the beginning that one of the big novelties is the idea that we're trying to address precarity with this. So we want applicants to explicitly mention the concrete long-term career prospects that they can offer. This does not have to be immediately afterwards an open-ended contract or a permanent contract. In many countries, that's not even possible. So this is not what we don't expect for an institution to invent this out of thin air. The main thing that we used as inspiration for this is, again, the European Charter for Researchers, where they talk about transparent and open accession and progression systems. So making sure that it's, in some institutions, it's a tenure track system specifically where there's evaluation moments. In another institution, it might be an open recruitment call, but at least that you're offering them something concrete that they would be eligible to and prepared to apply for at the end of the process. And so at the end of this Choose Europe period, we do understand as well that in these cases, it might also be, if it is an open recruitment or if there is some kind of accession and progression system, that it might be that 2 years after the Choose Europe project, there's an evaluation moment and that they don't meet the criteria and that you can't keep them on long term. And that is also not, we cannot penalize that, and we would also not want to, because it's also important. We understand that any kind of long-term career prospect is done in a way that's feasible for an institution, and that's also in accordance with with open and merit-based recruitment. Then finally, we have the quality and ambition of the research, innovation, and/or academic objectives of the recruitment program. And this is something that you might be familiar with more from a doctoral network or a postdoctoral fellowship. It's not something that's as central in CoFund, but in Choose Europe for Science, we've put a little bit more focus on it again. As we know that there's multiple researchers that are being recruited and that it's at postdoctoral level. And also you still have a limited amount of space to write your proposal. Again, we don't expect a full PF level proposal here. It's really about what are the objectives actually of the hosting body, the hosting research body. How does the program fit into those objectives and contribute to achieving them? And research objectives have to be a part of this because it is a research program, but because we also recognize that the positions for which you're recruiting may be more towards innovation, more towards tech transfer, project management, or many researchers, when they actually become, when they go into tenure track, they have to teach. So there's academic objectives as well. So we also tried to be flexible in terms of ensuring that these were all captured under this criterion. Impact is again something that's much more familiar, perhaps, if anyone has applied for a CoFund project. So there needs to be a contribution to addressing actual human resource needs. So what is the impact going to be on your institution, on your regional or national kind of or local R&I ecosystem? And then also the element of strengthening human resource good practices. Again, you don't have to invent something completely new. If your institution is doing really, really great things already in terms of human resource practices, you can also say that this will showcase them. And what will it showcase? What are you already doing well? So this is very much, these are criteria that are in line with what we already expect projects to describe. And then finally, the implementation. And again, this is explaining, here you'll give more information on what are the different steps that you'll take, what kind of risks might you expect, how it's about the feasibility, the credibility of the measures that you've put in place in order to successfully manage this project and achieve the aims that you've set. I put in a slide just to give a little bit more detail because there's been also several questions about these 2 points. So for career prospects, I feel like I've already covered this a bit. The fact that it really is meant to be adapted to local laws and limitations. So again, you can directly recruit the researchers into an open-ended contract, but this is not mandatory. You will not be marked down in evaluation if you don't. You do need to, however, explain if there are national laws and limitations in place, write them out, because evaluators will come from all over Europe, so they might not know what your usual institutional practices are. So it's about explaining the context and explaining what you're offering. And then again, I briefly mentioned this as well, but to go into a little bit more detail, also in terms of the roles. So those concrete prospects, we sometimes get questions like, okay, does it have to be a primary investigator? Does it have to be a research specific prospect? And we expect that there will be a research element to the prospect, but there's many, many different careers that researchers go into in which they are still contributing to the research ecosystem. And it's something that we've been discussing a lot in relation to the COARA, for example, the Agreement on Reforming Research Assessment. The Commission is also a signatory of this agreement. So recognizing all of the different contributions that individuals might make to research, even if their title might not be primary investigator. So we've included, like I said before, there's also an element of academic objectives that can be in there, because someone might be going more into a lecturing position than a pure research position. There might be a data scientist position. There might be a specialist position that's more technical, to do with different types of, if you're working with a certain research infrastructure, it might be more there might be project management elements of that. So it's not closed off in terms of the roles that you might be providing them, the concrete prospects that you're providing them following the project period. But of course, when you're describing your training that you're providing to the researcher during the project period, during the Choose Europe period, if the role that you're expecting them to go into is a lecturer position, then we might also expect that within the training, there's also an element of that the evaluator can find, so that the evaluator can see, oh, okay, yes, they are actually being really well trained for the role that they're going into. They're being trained in research, but they also have already an element of this teaching that really shows me that this applicant has thought about the kind of full line of career that they're offering within this project and the prospect afterwards. Now, I've mentioned a few times that there's different phases. So again, this is the Choose Europe for Science program that you will be managing if you successfully apply, put in a successful proposal, will be either 4 or 5 years. And the reason is because we have 2 phases. And the first phase is either 24 or 36 months. And we did this because we noted that in certain countries, postdocs can only be on temporary contracts for 4 years, and in other countries it's longer. So that's why we put in this flexibility. And in the first phase of the Choose Europe for Science program, so these first 24 or 36 months, depending on what you select in the proposal, there is a Choose Europe for Science allowance. And that is also linked to a minimum gross remuneration. So gross means that it includes employer cost, employee costs, and all of these things. In the second phase, there is no Choose Europe for Science allowance that is provided, but there is also we also don't set a minimum remuneration. It's expected that the institution sets a remuneration rate that is competitive, that is attractive, at their local or national level. And so when I described earlier the evaluation criteria, and under the excellence, the attractiveness of the appointment conditions, there you would also be able to explain, in our institution, this is how much, or in our institution, this is how much postdoctoral fellows are normally paid. You'll see that our salary that we're offering in the second phase is very much in line with this, and we're offering this and this and this and this benefit to ensure that it's attractive. Or even, that our salary that we're providing in the second phase is slightly above this, and we're providing this and this and this. So that's where you would really describe what you're offering in the second phase is competitive at a national level. And then for a little bit more detail on what is offered in terms of the co-funding from the EU side during the first phase, so these first 24 or 36 months, as I said, there's this Choose Europe for Science allowance, and it's 6,700 euros per person month. And we obtain this number because it is the sum of the PF living allowance and mobility allowance. And it is also, as I said, that is also the minimum gross remuneration. And that is in line with what we do for a co-fund as well, where the co-fund allowance is the minimum gross monthly gross remuneration that we offer, or that projects are expected to offer. Of course, you can go above this Choose Europe for Science allowance, but we know that it's already quite an attractive salary for many. We've also gotten the feedback, which we completely understand, that for many institutions, this is very, very high for the first phase, and then there would actually be a dip in remuneration rates that would be able to be offered in the second phase, where the institution itself is setting the rates and is paying. And the way that some institutions have kind of chosen to describe this is that in the first phase, it's almost like a relocation bonus, or, you know, some kind of an incentive to join, and then you actually even out so that you're on a pay scale that makes sense at a national level. And then there's also the possibility of having, during this first phase, a long-term leave allowance. This has to be requested. So this can be maternity leave, this can be some kind of sick leave, you know, any kind of longer-term leave that the researcher would need to take, and a special needs allowance, which again is to be discussed with the project officer at the moment when it is needed. This may seem counterintuitive to some, but I promise I can explain in a way that will make sense. So this Choose Europe for Science allowance, as I've said, it's the equivalent of the minimum, this minimum remuneration that we've set, but you can use it flexibly. So we don't expect that this money is given and that it only goes into the salary. Of course, you can do that, but for some institutions, they may already have, for example, a funding line from the institution for salaries. And in that case, you can use the money that comes from the co-funding that comes from the European Commission across different cost categories. So you can put some in order to top up whatever budget line that you already have for salary to make sure that it meets the minimum requirement, and then the rest you would be able to use to cover other costs. So again, this is in line with the practice that's already being used in co-fund. But those who haven't don't have experience with co-fund, for it can seem quite odd that we say that this is the minimum remuneration, but also you can use it for other cost categories. But the reason is because some institutions already, like I said, have this specific budget line that they can have access to. And for Choose Europe for Science as well, it can be used, you know, in conjunction with an existing national talent attraction scheme, as long as you follow the eligibility rules. So there's compatibility in that way of funding with, we tried to make it compatible with national or institutional or regional schemes. And so during the second phase, as I said, at this point, there's no more Choose Europe allowance, which is also why I said that the co-funding requirement is quite a bit heavier than a regular MSCA co-fund, and definitely than our other actions. But again, the monthly gross remuneration is to be set by the beneficiary, ensuring that it's competitive. Both the first and the second phase, the salaries that will be provided need to be, of course, explained in the proposal. And then if you're selected, these two salaries that have been proposed, of course, go into the grant agreement. So afterwards you can go above, but you can't go below. But we also expect that they're communicated at in the vacancy notice. So that's also really important, and that is actually something that is checked to make sure that, you know, if a fellow or if a researcher is recruited, that they know in advance what their gross remuneration will be for both phases. So like with every other MSCA action, we try and spread best practice also by encouraging employment contracts or equivalent direct contracts, so not these other types of fellowship schemes, which are run in a different way. The only exception where we do allow fixed amount fellowships is where there's a certain international regulation. So IEROs are the example that we have of this, where it's prohibited actually to offer an employment contract. And then I think this is my last slide. I'm also going to check for time. I think I'm still well within time. So as I said, the call opened on the 1st of October and it will close on the 3rd of December. And the budget is quite small, so 22.5 million euros. So the way we've been communicating it is that we expect to fund, a little over 100 researchers. The amount of projects that we fund will depend on the size. There's also no, we don't have any kind of weighting benefit to having a bigger project or smaller project. If you only recruit 3 researchers, then you will be judged at the same level as a project that's proposing to recruit 20. So both of those are equally valid, because we also had questions about that, about institutions who were a bit worried about them being disadvantaged if they actually want to only offer quite a small program. And I think the last thing that I wanted to give, and this is I've mentioned it a few times, but it's just maybe some things to just keep in your mind, because it's some of the things that we've seen in our other calls that are the most likely to negatively impact the evaluation of a proposal. So a proposal can be really, really wonderful and fantastic, and we absolutely would love to fund it. But if we see that there's this biased selection process, so that there's any form of pre-selection at all, then it can't meet the minimum threshold for excellence. And that's a real shame, because often these are very good projects, but there's some form of pre-selection in there, and therefore they have to get marked down. So this is something to be very, very aware of when writing a proposal. For Choose Europe for Science, again, because this is something new, we also recommend to really keep in mind throughout the proposal the connection to these long-term perspectives, because as I said, in the training section, the training, it should make sense, the training for the project, but also for what you're offering to this person as a career prospect following the immediate Choose Europe for Science project period or program period. And then the final one is something that it often kind of can have a negative effect in evaluations, is if there's a lack of clarity around the remuneration that is offered. So again, like I said, a lot of this is based on co-fund, because we use the co-fund action in order to have this pilot, and that's for IT purposes. We cannot create a whole new action in the space of time that we had. So in terms of remuneration, like with co-fund, it's expected that you really explain what is, for the second period, what is attractive at a national level, and then prove through what you are proposing to offer to these researchers that what you are offering as part of this program is attractive at national level. Because for you, it may be very obvious what the average salary is for a postdoc in your institution, but if you get an evaluator from France, they wouldn't necessarily be able to judge it in the same way. So making sure to always spell it out in that way is really important. And I think that's it from me.